Are you a business owner looking for real advice and input? You're in the right place. From concept to launch to growth, funding, and beyond. Welcome to Startup Hustle with your hosts. One once sold a business for $150 million. The other, the author of $1 Million Bedroom. Here are your hosts of Startup Hustle, Matt DeCoursey and Matt Watson.
1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2, 1. 'Cause no one can do it like we do it, like we do it, like.
And we're back. Another episode of Startup Hustle. Matt DeCoursey here with Matt Watson. Hi, Matt.
What's going on, man?
Just another day in the queue, baby.
Raising some cash?
No, I mean, well, they say queue time is due time, right? Or is that just me that says that?
Or due time?
No.
No.
Maybe for some. It depends if you have the TP in stock, I think.
I've got toilet paper.
I know. Well, that seems like a perfect time to mention that this episode of Startup Hustle is brought to you by Fullscale.io, which can help you build a software team quickly and affordably. And speaking of doing things affordably, or maybe even quickly, those are things that might not be in everybody's vocabulary or purview right now. So we wanted to bring in an expert with us today. We have Thad Langford, the managing partner of Flyover Capital. I guess there's plenty to talk about in the world of VC, PE, TP. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of this is affecting what you guys are doing at Flyover Capital, and not to mention the overall venture markets. You want to give us a quick update on how that whole world's looking these days?
So we just kind of take status of the cash situation, across each of the businesses. So, what do the cash inflows look like? What do the cash outflows look like? Let's get a current status and let's start doing some scenario planning. And so those are the common things across the portfolio. Although each of the details underneath, varied pretty substantially.
Yeah. It's a domino effect, and a lot of us don't know where we're at in the process, right? And every week is different. At Stackify, so we sell a B2B software service, and our business has stayed relatively flat. So we've been pretty fortunate. We're actually up 0.5% over this time last month. So that's a huge win, right? But we don't know week to week. We had a fairly good sized customer cancel this week. But we're also signing up some new customers. So, we're hoping to just kind of tread water, but you really just don't know. One of our big customers was a movie theater chain that had canceled. Another one that canceled a couple days ago was online reservations for restaurants that is canceled. So, it's just hit or miss. But then we have other customers that are in the education space, online education, that's booming. So, it's hit or miss, and it's week to week. We just don't know what's going to happen. And I kind of felt like April 1st, we'd see a flurry, like everybody kind of waits, and they're kind of doing monthly budgeting, and maybe May 1st may be the big D-Day. I don't know. We'll see.
Now, Thad, you mentioned things being regional and Flyover Capital, which, by the way, if you're listening, you can go to flyovercapital.com and check out more about what they're doing, or maybe drop a business plan in their lap. The flyover regions haven't been, and now I guess we should probably define that. So for those of you listening, the flyover areas are the middle states of the United States. So we're here in Kansas City, which is about dead center of flyover territory for a lot of people. And our region hasn't been terribly stricken with illness, not like New York or Seattle or LA. I mean, really the major ports of entry to the United States are the areas that have really, really been hammered. Do you think that has benefited? I mean, just the regional nature. Do you think that has caused less interruption with the flyover companies? Or since most of our businesses service people all over the country, do you think it's been kind of unilateral?
Yeah, I think it's a global world, right?
Well, we don't have a lot of people that are sick in the Midwest, but we're all on lockdown. So it's kind of the same effect.
Well, I think that companies that haven't even been greatly affected, meaning like, well, you look at Stackify. Matt, are you out spending a whole lot of new money right now?
Well, we're trying to be a little more conservative. I mean, we've cut some expenses, and trying to figure out how much more do we pull back on investing on certain things, and how do we weather the storm, right? Which is what everybody else is asking themselves.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that I think is, has a pretty profound effect across any company is, you as someone who considers myself to be a salesperson, there's strong buying climates, and then there's times when people are just sitting on the wallet. And I think that, times like this are always going to have, I mean, you saw the same thing in 2008. It's just, you talk about the effect, at full scale. I mean, we definitely saw a decline in billing. We didn't churn many, I mean, only one client, but a lot of our clients, you talk about, 36 different companies we work with. And if they all put one person back on our bench, it becomes fairly significant. And it's not that any of them, well, some of them were reporting heavy declines in revenue. And those were companies related to travel, maybe automotive, different stuff like that, anything that had events or people centric around what they were doing. And then we've had some companies, that were in we'll just say the tele space, are reporting record inquiry for their services, but even they're tentative to spend money. And that's just because the idea that their cash runway is what they thought it was. Now, Thad, I'm just assuming that you read the letter that Sequoia Capital issued in March.
Mm-hmm.
Are you familiar with this?
I am, yes.
Yeah, they've kind of now made themselves a bit of a harbinger when it comes to certain things. Now, I found that letter to be remarkably useful, just from a perspective standpoint. But two of the things that are in there that they say you have to question are your own cash runway and your ability to raise funds. And that's the whole point. Now, when it comes to liquidity and private equity firms putting money into early stage businesses, how much of that got seized up when the stock market took a nosedive?
That may end up meaning that you need to actually spend more now to reposition once things start, turning around. Of a guessing game, and it's scenario analysis here, and so you're kind of placing percentages on what's going to happen in the future.
What kind of industries do you think are interested in spending more as opposed to less right now?
Matt mentioned one earlier, the online education space. I think that space is trying to just figure out how to handle the load.
So one of the things you talk about from an analytics standpoint, looking at sales forecasts and possible expenses related to marketing. Now, one of the things that is pretty apparent is with as heavy and quickly as the changes have come and been, how much can you rely on past sales forecasts or, any type of cost of acquisition analysis or anything like that? I mean, I think that in many cases you got to throw a lot of that stuff out the window and start all over again. Does that make your job a lot more difficult?
I do think it makes it a lot tougher. I mean, just the unknown is really difficult. And, I think, thinking through different ways to, it became very commonplace on the marketing side. It became much more routinized, much more scalable, much more digital. And that sales were dependent on those type of marketing tactics. I actually think it's actually interesting the trend back to deep kind of connectedness to your sales targets. So right now, for example, I mean, we're encouraging our portfolio companies to reach out, like hand-to-hand combat, kind of back to a little bit of old school. Reach out to your customer, talk to them, see what they're going through, because to your point, we actually don't know what is happening on the other side. And so while it's not as scalable as the way that we were kind of moving towards in the digital sense, I think there's something that people are actually looking for, that connectedness, that real kind of personal connection right now, with everybody so distanced off from each other, that it kind of matches pretty well with the need to really understand the situation on the other side, which is a little more nuanced now than maybe it once was.
I think that's all I've been doing the last couple of weeks is talking to clients and customers about what is actually going on in their world. I mean, it's a wide array. I mean, I've talked to people that have had funding rounds that have fallen through, and talked to people that are cutting expenses as precautionary measures up front. And doing a lot of different things. So, how do you think that the government stimulus plan is going to affect the businesses that you're working with, or just businesses in general? I mean, we Full Scale managed to receive approval on a SBA
That's
on
great.
the PPP. Well, we were way in front of it. I mean, it was even before last week, which I say last week, I normally don't timestamp episodes. We're recording this on April 7th. Things are changing so quickly now. I've been timestamping these things so we don't sound like we're a week behind when it comes out. But I mean, even before, more than a week before the application submission opened, I was really, just I wouldn't shut up to our COO. I was like, we need to reach out to anybody we've talked to about SBA before, figure out who the right lenders are, and really kind of get on their radar so we'd be in front of that line. Now that line started to look pretty long for a lot of people, but I mean, what's your overall opinion on that, and how it could affect the businesses that you guys are your portfolio companies, or just businesses in general?
No, I think it can absolutely be part of the lifeline, and I give them a lot of credit, obviously for putting that package in place. I happen to think that it's going to require a lot more than what they put in place.
Yeah, me too.
And I'm not sure that the speed at which it got rolled out. Good for you guys, kind of being. I think everybody was certainly aware of it, but how to approach it and actually the execution of it, we still have some companies that, the banks that they're working with still, are just now accepting the applications. And
Yeah.
so I think it's made it, tougher, but I do think that it will probably, it'll require another round of that funding, and, knock on wood, hopefully that comes through. But I think it's a key component of it, but I don't think it's the only component. I don't think it's the only lifeline. I think companies need to take things and, certainly in their own hands as much as they possibly can. And, like I mentioned, kind of go through the steps before and assess their own business and determine, what's going to be required, and what are some of the other avenues to be able to, to fill the gaps, or, I'll go back to survive and advance.
I think that's a good analysis. Matt, what's your take on all this stuff?
I think what you mentioned earlier, Thad, was the figuring out your runway. Is it 12 months? Is it 18 months? And I saw some things that recommended like 12 to 18 months because it may be that long until the capital markets and investing markets come back around. But it's hard, when you're let's say you're a company like Stackify, and we thought we were going to do X, we thought we were going to do Y. Our runway kind of depends on all those variables. Like, it's so hard to know and project the future that at the same time, you don't want to be ultra conservative and like fire 80% of your employees. So, I mean, it's like, it's a really difficult time right now, and it's just a week to week thing.
Yes, I 100% agree. I mean, I think it's, those that are strong and are really on top of their business, you're going to see a bifurcation here of those founders and entrepreneurs that are really on top of their business and know it on a day-to-day basis, and those that are not. And I think this crisis certainly will push those that were not prior to crisis, will push them closer to being on top of their business, or else they won't survive through this. And I do think there is something. I mean, look, I was running our business in 2008, 2010. So technology startup during 2008, 2010. So I have a little bit of PTSD kind of coming through that crisis. And what I do know is that for those that buckle down, that really understand their business, that are able to make really hard decisions right now, and there are lots of hard decisions to be made right now, that if you can make it through it, you do come out the other end stronger. Maybe not on the balance sheet, but you come out stronger as an entrepreneur, as knowing your business well. And I think it does help you position to be able to then kind of thrive. So survive and advance, and then thrive is the third component. So once you kind of survive and make it through it, how do you thrive after that? And I think the struggle and the really forces you to really understand your business, understand your customers, understand your cash runway, understand where every dollar is going, and how do you generate return out of that dollar. And it forces you to do that during these times, that it will make those entrepreneurs that do that better and stronger coming out of the end, and raises the probability of success at the end of this.
It's survival of the fittest.
Thad, so you mentioned, having been around in 2008, 2009, I referred to on a phone call yesterday, I referred to myself as an old jaded entrepreneur, meaning like I have kind of, as much of an optimist as I consider myself to be in life, I have learned to respect Murphy and all of his laws, perhaps. As having, this is 10 years, 12 years later from the last major crisis. What's your advice as a village elder, like the rest of us on the podcast today?
Yeah, I like to refer to myself as a realistic optimist.
Yeah,
so
that's a good one. Yeah.
You've got to have a balance there, and I don't think it's any different than what I was saying before, which was know your business, know thy business. I mean that is the key. And you have to be on top of this, or else you won't make it through. And I do think that every successful entrepreneur that I know of, at least that I know, the trajectory was not straight up and to the right. It wasn't like their forecast on the slide, right? The revenue's just going straight up and to the right. It was, everyone has hit a point where they thought that they were going to be out of business, at least once, if not twice, if not multiple times. And the ones that really made it through, and again had to make some hard decisions, and it's not easy, right? I mean, you have to make some tough decisions around what people to keep, what your team look like, what your valuation look like on your company, and have a realistic view of it, and make some really hard decisions kind of through it. But again, I do think that every successful entrepreneur I know has hit that point. And I know of very few successful entrepreneurs that have not at least hit that point once.
I think some of the things that you're talking about when you refer to, quote, hard decisions is also, I love the term realistic optimist, but in order to be that, you have to, I mentioned the Sequoia letter before, which was kind of a nice little bullet list of bullshit that you can expect to occur over the next, who knows, unforeseeable future. But, just little things like expecting a drop in business activity, expecting supply chain disruptions, knowing you're going to see a curtailment of travel and canceled meetings, question your cash runway, don't assume that any fundraising is going to occur at the valuation that you thought it would or at all. Don't rely on your past sales forecasting or marketing analysis. And then other things like you might have to question your headcount and your overall capital spending, which, all those things are different. You look at certain businesses, like at Full Scale, I need the headcount to generate revenue now or going forward. But at what point does that get so heavy that you have to take care of it? And then at other businesses, you might have an easier time changing your headcount and have a different impact on what it is and how everything's going. And I think one of the things that you said that's really important is every business is looking at a different scenario. And by the way, I don't think I've ever owned a business that I didn't look at and say, oh shit, we might go out of business at some point. You mentioned that seems to be like a rite of passage for successful businesses along the way. It's almost that equivalent of having hot skates on thin ice at certain times. And that whole concept of survive and advance is pretty. I mean, even in times of non-crisis, it seems to be usually something that entrepreneurs get to tuck under their pillow at night and dream about it not being that way. So, I think that one of the things that entrepreneurs especially are equipped for are crisis situations, because if you've done this long enough, you're used to that up and down roller coaster. I mean, I think Matt and I have spent so much time on this podcast talking about the ups and the downs, and also even focused on things like founders depression, which I would bet is probably at an all-time high right now. What's your thoughts on that, Watson?
I think they said on TV yesterday, 4 out of 5 Americans have some form of stress, depression, mental issues at this point related to, they lost their job, they're worried about getting sick, they're stuck at home, like all of those things, right? Like all of Americans have some sort of mental health problem at this point.
Is that
and
up
for
from
sure,
is that up to 4 out of 5 from 3.5?
Probably so.
Yeah. But yeah, you talk about that, and we've literally had episodes in the past about the term founders depression, which, entrepreneurship is a tough ride, and it is a battle, and it's that survive and advance mentality on a lot of days. And sometimes you're like, hey, let's just take care of today and we'll worry about tomorrow when we wake up tomorrow. I think that some of the things right now that are the toughest to plan around is like, you even just look at like, okay, so it was just a few days ago that you could apply for a PPP loan, which going up to that moment of submitting your application was something that the government had, oh yeah, this could be pretty easy. You may see a same day approval, and the banks are going, hey, come on now. Don't say that too much, because people might begin to believe it. Then you see you start hearing about banks turning stuff away, blah, blah, blah. Just the level of uncertainty. I've quoted Tom Petty multiple times when he said the waiting is the hardest part. And I think maybe the way we can round this episode out, and once again with us today, we had Thad Langford, the managing partner of Flyover Capital, which you can find at flyovercapital.com. But I think maybe we could do a quick round, and we could give some insight about at what point you're actually waiting and at what point you're actually being stubborn. Does anybody have any input on that? Because that's a tough question, but at some point you're doing one or the other.
Well, you talked earlier about the extending the runway thing, right? Let's say we have 6 months of runway right now. We need to get to 12 to 18 or figure something out. But every month that you wait, the ability to extend that, 5 months that would be left to 12 or to 18 becomes infinitely more difficult. And so, but it's a very delicate balancing act with like you said, being stubborn. And I think it was the Sequoia article you mentioned, or some other things I read that talked about, the more you hesitate, the worse it becomes, because especially those that think that they're almost there, they're like, oh, well, next week we'll get this thing and we're really close. And then like another week and another week, and you're just like circling the drain. Right. But we're also in this place where we're talking about PPP, for example. PPP is a huge lifeline. So I could have laid off half my staff last week, or I wait a week and I get PPP, and then I'm good for 2 or 3 months, and that's where everybody is in this delicate balance of figuring out, do you make the brash decisions and you let everybody go and you extend your runway, or do you wait a couple weeks, you get PPP, and it's so difficult. I think we're all going to be schizophrenic.
if we all weren't already.
Yeah, it's tough.
Thad, what's your input here?
Yeah, well, it's interesting. The two words you use, waiting and stubborn, I think they have different connotations underlying them, right? I mean, waiting kind of connotates or kind of brings up conjures the idea of not doing anything, right? So kind of just waiting and sitting back and being more reactive, where stubborn to me has a little bit more of a proactive slant to it, right? We're still being stubborn. I'm still kind of plowing forward. I'm still trying to take action, trying to figure it out. And I would much rather be on the stubborn side than on the waiting side, if those are the underlying kind of contextual components of those two words. Because you know it is, there's always something that you can be doing. And Matt, I feel it. I've felt that pain of, like, when do you make those hard calls of reducing the workforce versus kind of hanging on for a little while, for another month. If I keep that person for one more month, they're going to land the next sale, big
Yeah.
sale for the company, et cetera. And so, and the reality is, it's an unknown. And so, I think at the end of the day, as long as stubborn means that you're being stubborn, meaning you are on top of your game on every move within that business, and are being thoughtful about each of the moves that you make, then I think you're on the right path. I mean, I tell people all the time, I go, look, I feel like I got a lot more wrong than I got right when I was running the company that I was running. It just so happened the things I got right were the right things to get right at the right time, and the things I got wrong didn't kill the company. But at no time was it responsible or okay just to stand still and not do anything. And I think that's the point, is kind of, I mentioned, people were paralyzed a couple, like 2 weeks ago, because it was just like, oh my gosh, like the world is fundamentally crumbling right now. And I think very quickly, the sooner we can get out of that and at least take steps forward, one step at a time, one decision at a time, one move at a time. You're not going to make all the right ones, but at least you're moving, and at least you are taking action, and you're being stubborn in the sense that you are stubborn in your belief that you're going to make it through this, and that you're going to take the next step.
And great answers from both of you guys. I'll just mush the two together, because I think that you're right, that the terms do need a bit of context to them. So, like, for example, when I say waiting, I had to wait a little bit to see, like, an example would have been last week. We didn't even have guidelines about how PPP would be calculated, when that might be available, what the application process was, what the likelihood of forgiveness might have been, in and around the whole program. So in certain cases, you do end up waiting. In some regards, I've seen a lot of business owners over the last 15 years be stubborn in a way that led to fatality, and just sitting there and saying the ship is not headed towards the rocks. The ship is not headed towards the rocks, people. And it clearly is, I've said, and then I think that a certain mix of waiting and being stubborn can also lead to fatality, because you're going to have people that are going to come out of this and they're going to be saying for years, well, if things were only the way they used to be, which are words that I hear people say right before they go bankrupt, a lot, and say, and guess what? Things are never going to be the way they used to be. They're only going to be the way that they are going forward. And, so that's where that kind of mix of waiting and stubborn can cross the line. I 1000% agree that the term waiting should not mean that you're just sitting there doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Like during our quote waiting, we have been highly analytical and really trying to look at a bunch of different things. I think I'm about one cash flow scenario away from schizophrenia, Matt. I think that, it's like, I don't even know which tab I'm looking at on the spreadsheets anymore. I'm like, is this the, there's so many different things. And we started modeling this out. Thad, I don't know if you know this, but I was over in the Philippines for the first 19 days of March. And that side of the world was a couple weeks ahead of us when it came to a lot of stuff. So I was, around the 7th of March, I was in the Philippines, and I'm going into the Full Scale office in my hotel or 7-Eleven or anywhere, and they're zapping your forehead with a laser, and to see if you have a temperature. And I'm sitting there going, oh man, shit's getting real. And that that actually had a big effect on me, because I started, it's kind of hard to not feel the gravity of what's going on when everywhere you go, there's a dude or a lady in a face mask zapping your forehead with a laser to see if you have a temperature. Now according to me, I was about 60 degrees. They kept telling me I was 38 or 37 or 36. And I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me. I'm like, I'm way low. I mean, I might be dead then. And they're like, Celsius. So I still don't understand any of that, but I know that you don't want to be above 38. So, but like I said, there was a level of reality that was just like slapped right across my face with that. And it really started to make me realize, especially when it was the point at our office building when they wouldn't let more than 5 people in the elevator. And, I was like, wow. And, you started seeing things, and you're seeing them here now, but they had like little footprints in the elevator. They'd have like 5 sets of them, and they're like, hey, stand here. And now you go to the grocery store, or I haven't been to the grocery store since I've been back, but traveling through Tokyo on the way back and having to go through a high-tech thermal sensor. I'm like, wow, okay, that's weird. And then getting back to Seattle and seeing that we were doing none of the stuff that I had then become used to, I was like, we might be in trouble. So yeah, I think that when it comes to it's as the great chess masters of the world are very well known for trying to play 3, 4, 5, 6 moves ahead, as many as they can. But in order to come to that solution, they've got to look at it as many moves and as many combinations and as many things as possible. So I think if you are sitting and quote waiting, if you're waiting to see what happens in something, don't make those events that are super far away. Like waiting a couple days to see how your PPP loan application goes is a different scenario than waiting till waiting till May 27th to make a decision about personnel. I mean, we might be living in a completely different world by then. So who knows? But well, once again, with us today, we have Thad Langford, the managing partner of Flyover Capital. You can learn more about Thad and his company at flyovercapital.com. Thad, do you have anything else to say on the way out?
No, I think just kind of circling back, maybe the last thing is just, the realistic optimism is the best approach. And I also just will piggyback on a little bit of what you said. Just encourage everyone to play chess, not checkers here. Even though you're thinking about that next jump, think about several moves forward. Now is the time to be able to do that. In a lot of cases, we now have the time to be able to think ahead. I think there's a little, that's the optimistic side of me, is to think, all right, what's some of the good things that can come out of this? And I think it has allowed people to, I think now, maybe this week, to slow down just a bit, to be able to think more strategically and to allow themselves to think about those moves in advance, to allow them to play chess, not checkers.
Well, once again, great advice. And I think on that note, I'll go ahead and say I'll see you guys next time.